It's a real pleasure to have you with us. And I hope that as a starter, make sure you got your coffee. I've got a little one today. The jug's about the size of my head, I think, but Margot's saying, no, a jug looks like a jug. Coffee. And of course, make sure you got some morning tea. I'm fortunate this morning. I've got some peanuts and some strawberries there, which are really great. And, oh, geez, somebody snuck a donut in on my plate. God, who did that? Anyway, we'll enjoy it anyhow. So I've got some morning tea, coffee, get ready. So we're going to have a great conversation this morning. And before we jump into it, I guess a big shout out to our family down in New South Wales and to everyone there in New South Wales. Look after yourselves. Another couple of weeks of lockdown. Case numbers are coming backwards a bit, but still at 65 today. It's still a lot. And we can see this this Delta variant of the coronavirus being quite problematic for every state. Seeing it now moving into Victoria a little bit. Hopefully they get through that nice and quick, and a little bit of it floating around up here in Queensland. So fingers crossed we get through it. As painful as it is and as hard as it is, we've got to do what we've got to do. And any of you who are struggling through these times, make sure you reach out. Talk to a mate if you're having problems from a mental health point of view, or if you've got other issues with lenders and so on, speak to our state managers, our state presidents, councillors, all around Australia. Reach out, talk to us, and we'll do all we can to help. And on that note, a big thank you to our sponsors who support us to make it available for us to bring all of our content to you free of charge. The great folk at ALI, to Bluestone, Finstro, Prosper, Heartland, Suncorp, Ondex, Speedy, Affordable Staff, Insurance Advisor Net, Len, Pepper Money, Strive Financial, AAMC, FE, Credit Fix Solution, Trailbooks Loans, and FunTap. My goodness, that list is getting longer, I think. But yeah, thanks for your support, everyone. You're wonderful, wonderful people, and we really appreciate all you do for the FBAA and more so all you do for our members. It's a great thing. So let's move forward. I guess I should introduce our very special guest today, Mr. Matthew Rodgers, who's Senior Associate of RBG Lawyers. And a little disclaimer, yes, they're our corporate lawyers. But the reason for that is these are smart folk. They know their shit, right? They know our industry, and we can get some good stuff out of them. And if you haven't put your questions in already, send them through on chat. Mariah in the background will message me with them, and we'll ask Matt those tough questions for you and get to the bottom of some of those challenging things that are going on in our industry. So Matt, welcome. Where are you, buddy? You there somewhere in the background? Turn on that. Here he comes.
Morning, Peter. How are you? Good morning to everybody who's joining us via the wonderful internet. Lovely to be here.
Yes, I don't know about the wonderful internet. It's great when it works, and I must admit I've had some internet challenges of late, and hopefully the enhancements of recent year at home have improved that quality. So no dropouts, I hope. So, but Matt, look, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, and I know how busy you are. Even especially as this morning, you were called into court at the last minute, and there was a bit of a question mark, would you make it back at time? But you have, and you've made time for us, so thank you so much. We all very much appreciate it from everyone around the country who's joining us this morning. So thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It was scary when documents are flying around at 11:45 last night, but thankfully it was all went off without as much of a hitch as I expected. So I'm glad I was able to make it back for everybody.
Very good. Oh, we're very glad you did. Matt, before we get into some of these questions and some interesting subjects that we can have a bit of a chat around, tell us the Matt Rodgers stories. Did you sort of leave school and go straight into the legal profession, or tell us a bit more about what your journey was like to get you to where you are today? Because you certainly haven't got any grey hair, so you're not that old yet. You're a young lad.
I haven't got any grey hair, but it is definitely thinning as I'm reaching that problematic age. I hope people don't scrutinise my headshot too closely. I think it's only going to cause me some pain in the later years. Basically, I finished school.
I'm going to leave that one go, so we'll continue
on. Look, I started in the law as early as 2010. My family's been wrapped up in the law, going back to the 1980s. So it was initially leaving school, I thought, it was either this or I went into something in the scientific field. And I chose obviously a dual of applied science and laws. out at Queensland University of Technology. Shout out to them. And so I started that, and I realized that arguing seemed to fit my personality a bit more than cold and calculating science. I'm not sure if that says any good or bad things about me. But look, yeah, I finished in 2015, and then I started officially with RBG, starting in October 2015 now. And so I've been there ever since. So coming up to a fairly good innings so far here. And it really just shows that, with the right firm, you can really build a good environment of helping people out where they need it. I think we've had a relationship for some 5 or 6 years now.
I think
since I've started.
We've been working with yourselves. I think it's close to that mark.
Yeah. A second grader.
Hey, so tell me, I have a burning question of my own. What does a lawyer do to relax? And it's not reading papers for court at 1:45
Sleep, traditionally. No, look, I generally enjoy, I enjoy sport. I play touch football every Sunday and Monday. That's obviously been subject to some difficulties in the last 18 months, much like everyone else's world. But yeah, besides that, it's really just, I enjoy the Netflix and the Stan binge sessions that everyone else seems to enjoy. It's nice, but for some reason, despite reading all day, I seem to keep watching it with the subtitles on. So I don't know, I just can't stop myself from reading things. So, I don't know, I think that's probably not a very good thing.
It's very funny though. But it's in my world anyway. I think that's funny. Oh dear. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's and of course, yeah, it's been very challenging for everyone through the COVID period, that getting out and playing sports and so on, that being out in the community has had its rough trots, and it comes good, then it gets bad again. And I guess it's one of those things that I think is going to, well, we all know, I think it's going to live with us probably forever, or for at least a very long time. I know now I've had both my COVID injections. I took that upon myself to get it done. And, there's always the pros and cons, and should you, shouldn't you, and which one is it? And I only just fall into that slightly older bracket. So I had the the AstraZeneca jab. But unfortunately, when I had the first one, I actually got Bell's palsy from it. So I had somebody else do the last Q&A for me. But that's a nothing thing, like you deal with it and you move on. It's important that not only are we protecting ourselves, but we're protecting our community as well. So we can get back to doing those things we want to do, playing sport and getting out and about and traveling, not just around the country, but overseas as well. God knows when that'll happen, but hopefully not too far away. And in this day's environment, not too far away still could be a year or two, but anyhow, we'll move on. Let's talk about some things that's happening in the industry and some legal thoughts around it. And one of the questions I actually wanted to speak to you around, it's not really a question we've been asked, it's one that sort of infers it, but you and I have chatted around issues with AFCA, for example, our ombudsman. And without going into specific details, but is it a fair situation for a broker that feels that they've been dealt a wrong blow by a determination from AFCA to try and challenge it? And is there any point, or is it a waste of time?
Thanks, Peter. It's a very difficult thing, and I think we should start a counter for the number of times I say it depends, which for the subtext, and maybe we should have some subtitles for me. When I say it depends, it means that there's a boatload of assumptions that I've just built into it, so I can give you an answer that has some sense of reality.
We'll put the definitions at the end.
Yes, put an asterisk and put it in the fine print. I think it will depend upon what the reason for the termination of the contract is. Yeah. Because if there's something that, let's take the example of the borrower has said things that are factually incorrect, and there is absolutely no reason the broker should have picked that up, and then there's a complaint with AFCA, then it seems to me to be a bit unfair that then it comes home for the broker, particularly in terms of if that fraud comes out in, say, the first 12 months, and as a result, you have some sort of clawback issue. Now, if that's something that couldn't have been picked up, that can seem quite unfair. But the way that it's sometimes played out is that, well, the broker should have known better. And that's a very difficult thing to prove of what someone should have known. You look at most, cases that go to court, it's saying what someone should or should not have been able to do is a very complicated and a very costly thing to prove. Unfortunately, the way our industry is put together is that a lot of it's based on contract. And because it's so expensive to prove otherwise, we're kind of stuck with the regime that we've got, as possibly imperfect as it is. So I know that seems like a bit of a yes but no type answer.
Yeah, but I think when it comes to, I think a lot of it is, it's all subject to, is what I normally say.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we sort of all get that, but I sometimes, we see, a fair few issues come through, which is an us against them. We've been badly done by. Some of it rings true, some of it doesn't, some of it's a reality of life. It's a real mixed bag stuff. But again, without going into any specifics, have you guys ever taken on cases against AFCA and won?
I've taken on a case on behalf of a lender who a particular borrower had issues with. And they went to AFCA, and this process is probably, the example I'm thinking of is an example of how the AFCA system could be done better. This lender had a defaulting borrower, and because of this complaint, couldn't realise their position for about 18 months. And this was after the complaint got dismissed, and then re-enlivened, and then redismissed, and then appealed, and then redismissed. So it's a lot of a stop-start process, and AFCA does have it is built to protect borrowers, is my view. And as a result, a lot of people who aren't the borrowers can have a lot of hardship, particularly when they've got their own stakeholders who they might have borrowed money from in order to lend it to these borrowers. So in these types of circumstances where AFCA binds up a lender's position, they've got obligations to someone else and they can't get their money, which is difficult. So
the reality at the end of the day, all ombudsmen are set up to protect the consumer. It's to defend against those that are at a system that's at no cost, and it's against the industry. I mean, inherently, that's what it is. And it's no different with AFCA. But you sort of, like all of us, none of us are perfect. So we all make mistakes from time to time. And, I sometimes get concerned that maybe we roll over too easy at times rather than trying to defend a position if it's reasonable too. And I personally hate the situation that people go, well, AFCA's going to hit me up with $5 grand. I'm innocent and done nothing wrong and I can prove it, but it's not worth time and money to fight it. I might as well just pay the $5 grand and walk away. And I get that. Commercially, that can make sense. But at the same time, I go, yeah, that's just not right. And we have a good relationship with AFCA from the FBAA and myself up into the executive CEO and so on. But it sort of doesn't necessarily guarantee the results. I do know, for those that are listening, AFCA are reviewing their fee structures at the moment. That was because I did petition on behalf of a member a case that seemed to be a little bit unfair. It was I think there was an agreement reached to pay, say, something like $500 as in compensation to the client, which had nothing to do with them in principle. They wound up settling for $300 because that's what AFCA determined, and then got a bill for $8 grand. I said, how do you get a bill for $8 grand when the fine was $300? Jeez. So yeah, it's challenging. So I guess the reality is, if there are fair grounds, it may be reasonable to look at challenging it, depending on. There's our little caveat at the end, depending on.
And that's the thing, is if you've got a situation that's potentially worth hundreds of thousands, then you might as well fight AFCA about it. But if, as you said, there's an issue that's worth only 5,000, then you end up spending, and the reality is you will end up spending that fighting it anyway. So why not, from a commercial perspective, get some finality for the same money.
Yeah, and with not so much grey hair or loss of hair.
I'm still young with chomping at the bit to take on issues.
Yeah, good. We like that. We like that a lot. And talking about chomping at the bit to take on issues, the other thing that we have spoken about in the past, and there's still things that we're looking at in the background that we'll leave in the background for the moment, but is where brokers get termination letters from aggregators or lenders that infer things but don't directly state things, and that can cause cancellation of accreditations, both not just the lender, but it could be from the lender and then impact from an aggregation point of view. And then that has an impact of stifling that person's ability to run a business because they lose their accreditations. So there's ACCC thought processes come into being around anti-competitive practices, making something an inability to actually conduct business as such, because they can't write any loans with anyone. And again, it's all subject to, we get it, but when something's not black and white, is it, I don't know if it falls into unfair contracts or what it falls under, but where you just say, well, wait a second, you're shooting me with no proof. Now this surely isn't fair, this surely isn't right. What's the legal fault behind that, or am I just spouting off my top of my head? Wouldn't be the first one.
You're not spouting off the top of your head. It is a very significant concern. It's one that we've looked at a number of times. But I think the critical issue is the way that the industry is structured from a legal perspective, because we've got three players. You've got your lender on one side, your borrower on the other, and you've got a broker in the middle. Now, given the way the industry has evolved, we've now got a fourth in the middle, which is the aggregator. And the documents between the broker, the aggregator and the lender are generally not well drafted. Or they don't exist. Now, when things are not drafted properly, or they're a little bit vague, or they don't exist, then these issues about, well, you're shooting me without proof, then comes into play, because you then basically have to say, well, we had an agreement and all of these things should have been implied. And now implying things into agreements is very difficult. It depends upon a number of factors, like, is it needed for the contract to work? And in the case of a separation letter, the agreement between the broker and the aggregator can work without that type of clause about when those letters can be given being implied. So that makes it very difficult for the broker to say, well, you should give me a clean bill, or you should particularize your issues. The only way, as far as we've been able to look at so far, that we can fix that up is by either one, coming together and having a single rule book for brokers, aggregators and lenders on how those relationships will be managed, or for all the individual aggregators who are the linchpin between our brokers and our lenders to really drive that process and says, look, unless someone's going to put together some definitive proof they're willing to hang their hat on, we really should be allowing people to move between employment. Turning to the ACCC part of that issue, the ACCC generally only gets involved if there's a substantial lessening of competition, and that looks at the market as a whole. So the difficulty that happens, if it's just one offender doing one particular thing, how does that impact the industry as a whole? The industry is quite large, so the ACCC might not necessarily want to get involved.
Would it be a principle then, based on that it happening in one instance would create a precedence across the whole industry, and therefore it does have an impact on the larger whole?
I think the short answer to that's no, because for any type of prosecution of any competitive conduct, you have to be able to blame someone. And I can't use Peter's conduct to blame Paul. So what we'd have to do in that case is show that there's some sort of collusion between all of whoever is doing the wrongdoing to arrive at something that is anti-competitive. Now that adds a lot of extra factual allegations, which can be quite difficult to prove as well. The ACCC's got some ways of doing that, and they have tried to employ those in the past. But as the ordinary consumer or also another participant in the industry, that's a much more difficult thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. I have got some. We're obviously stirring the conversation up. We're getting some messages coming through my phone rather quickly. One thing though, one of the points is somebody's just made a comment which is very apt. But so is it right to say though there is or there is not a right of appeal against a determination from AVCA? Because basically you fought AVCA and won, regardless of what the issue was. So does that then say there is a right of appeal if it's appropriate, measured, and commercially sensible sort of stuff?
For the borrower, yes. I've looked at an advice, it was a number of months ago, so if I'm not getting it completely right, I apologise. But because of the way AVCA is set up, in that all the lending institutions subscribe to it as members, they in effect agree to and endorse that decision. And so whatever that decision is, it's forced upon them, whereas it's not forced upon the borrower because they don't subscribe to the same system.
Oh, what about the broker? I don't care about the lenders. I'm worried about brokers. Are they
well, it depends upon the type of the complaint. Or ordinarily, it'll be a borrower against a lender. However, in this case, the broker is the agent. So that's the way the broker frequently gets brought in. It's, well, they were the nexus between. They're neither a borrower nor a lender. So it's a bit of uncertain about where they fit in all of this. And if they're not one of the parties to it, it's a decision that theoretically doesn't necessarily affect them, even though practically it will. Yet they might not necessarily have that same right of appeal.
But as brokers are members of the Ombudsman, are they not then bound by the governances that AVCA puts out? So they basically own the determination?
I think that can work as well, yes. So yeah, it depends on whether that person is a member, because ordinarily the condition of being a member is that if there's decisions that are made, you agree with them as a condition of your membership.
And I think the thing you've got to do is that the number of complaints against brokers is around 0.3% of the financial services complaints. It's very, very small, right? So, and this is one reason why we don't get a lot of traction to get resolves, and there probably are other things happening in the background, but it's hard to get traction to get things changed because it's a very, very small percentage of all complaints that they receive. Problematic. Let's move on from AVCA. I probably spent too long on that, but it was good. I enjoyed it. It was interesting. Sorry, mate, I've just got a very long text come through. I'll have to read that in a minute. I'll start on something else, then we'll come back to it. The other area that we've spoken around was those separation letters. It came back to the separation letters. Is there any precedence in law that sort of says, well, if you're going to sack someone, you've got to give them definition and this would, I guess, fall under a contracts law sort of thing. It's not employment law because they're not employees. But if I turn around and say, we had an agreement to work together, we're no longer working anymore, rip, and it means for some reason that I can't work again, should there be reasons? Is there any precedence in any other case history or anything else that sort of says, well, you actually are supposed to sort of define what the issue is?
So let's first separate between an employee and a consultant, because a lot of the industry is built on a consultancy, which is not an employment scenario.
Right. Move away from employment things.
So let's just assume that the relevant broker is a consultant rather than an employee. The agreement under which they consult will say we can terminate you for various reasons, but that agreement might not necessarily say what the consequences of that will be. For example, I've seen some broker agreements which don't refer to a letter of separation being given at all. Now, even though practically it is something that is become more practically required by the industry, it seems very concerning that these agreements say, well, we aren't required to give you anything.
And that you just touched on a very, very good point there, man. That the reality is this is something that has been a design of industry. There's no precedence in legislation or regulation about separation letters having to be given. So this is something, I'm not going to point at myself, I'll point out the end of the ether. Industry has brought this on us. There's nothing to say you've got to do this. And that's where a lot of my concerns lie. They say, oh, well, wait a second, we're a victim of our own stupidity somewhere.
I don't think it's stupidity. I think we're dealing with an emerging industry with the best information that we had at the time, and you can't really blame people's decisions in the past if they were making them with the best information they had at that point in time. I think as we've developed
history,
I think as the industry's developed, these issues get teased out. And I think the whole premise behind the separation letters is you want incoming aggregator or lender to have some confidence that they're not taking someone on who's got a history of trouble, particularly when that aggregator would be responsible for their credit reps, that might be attached to their license. So they want that, and that's the whole idea of the letter of separation comes out of trying to address that concern. The problem is that we haven't really defined that uniformly across the industry. So there'll be pockets which do it cleanly and pockets which don't.
Yeah, and ASIC is trying to address this through reference checking protocols. And they actually see it as a means to get rid of separation letters. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but anyhow, that conversation still continues. Hey, another question that's come through, or point that's come through from somebody listening in is, what's the precedence, not precedence, but what's the position around when basically lenders say they just don't want to do business with you? I mean, is that just a commercial right to pick and choose who they want, or does it create a restriction of trade somehow for people in that, in theory, that this is something one should have the right to be able to utilise? Is there any sort of background? Sorry, and it is a question without notice, I know. That's right.
No, I think to attack it from its first principles, businesses generally have a right to refuse service. So let's take a pub. If somebody's overly intoxicated, that pub has the right to say, well, I don't want to do business with you. So please leave. So I think as a result, it's really an extension of that concept. Once you're in the door and they've agreed to, put you on, the lender's agreed to put the particular aggregator or broker on their panel, then they say, we don't want to do business with you. That might amount to some sort of breach of that agreement. But again,
because that's the extension of the message I've got. They're actually on the lender's books. They're getting paid trials and commissions, and they still have an accreditation, but the lender won't accept any more new business from them. Now, I don't know if it's volume related. I think the whole to do new business with us, you must do a certain volume is absolute bullshit. It shouldn't be allowed. That to me is very, very wrong. And that was a part of things that came out of ASIC's report 516 and where that genesis to about volume hurdles within broker clubs, which then became quality styled measures, which are BS in their own right, because it doesn't work. There's still volume requirements out in the marketplace. So, to me, I'm against broker clubs because of that volume hurdle, but the volume hurdle piece still seems to constantly play out, and it shouldn't. But ASIC is very dark on that sort of stuff. But so if you are accredited and you are getting paid commissions, but they all of a sudden won't take more loans or more new loans, I guess there's some questions to be asked.
I think you need to look into your documentation very carefully and see what they've agreed or not agreed to do. And it will really turn on those terms. And if you've just signed the document that's put in front of you, you might be stuck with the regime you've got, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I won't name names, but for the person that sent that through, there's something to have a look at there, possibly. And of course, excuse me, from my point of view, anyhow, any lenders that try and act like a schoolyard bully needs to be reined in by using bullying tactics to push people around and to allow some to do some things and others not to, or take personal grievances and so on. And we've all, in this current environment, also need to be a bit more sensitive than maybe what we were in the past, in that tensions are high with the restrictions with COVID and the impact that has on people's lives and livelihoods and their families and so on. The stresses are significant. There's no argument or debate about that. But it plays on both sides, plays on the lender side, plays on the broker side, and it plays on the borrower side. So we've sort of got to have that bit more balanced perspective and probably a little bit more calmness if we can, not to get too hot under the collar too quick. I'm probably as guilty as anyone of that, but anyhow. But yeah, I think we just got to be a little bit more patient with things as well. But at the same token, there is no room for bullying or any form of harassment in our industry or anywhere else whatsoever. Yeah, all right. Let's move on to some other interesting points here that were submitted to us prior to coming online today. Mate, I don't know how up to speed with you are on this, but I know, and I've seen some stuff myself in the last 5 or 6 months where people have put up websites and you sort of go, there's no disclaimers, there's no Privacy Act, there's nothing on this. It's just like almost a blank sheet of paper almost when it comes to governances. Are there specific requirements around these sorts of things with websites, with disclosures and governances around Privacy Acts and how you interact with customers? Are there any rules around that, or is it open slather?
I'll use my favourite phrase. It depends.
It depends.
It depends upon what the I'm going to say the website owner is using that website for. Now, if they're using it, a lot of people use their websites to put up their privacy policy, because the Privacy Act requires you to have it in a readily available location, and most of everyone has access to the internet. And so it's a really effective way to say on your documentation, if you want to see our privacy policy, you can look at our website. That's probably the number one reason why people have it on their website. It then turns to what services you're offering and what information you're providing. Because if you're only providing information, you don't really need to have terms and conditions relating to the goods and services you're providing, because the only thing you're providing is information. But you should also have particular terms about what you're reading on that website, because a big concern is some sort of misrepresentation. I'm talking about the person who puts on their website, we do X, and they don't. Because that can obviously cause some damage to potential consumers. So a lot of the time people will put onto their website the terms and conditions of using the website, which will include things like you need to do your own independent investigations. We don't warrant, the accuracy of information, material like that. You then might also have some terms and conditions governing the goods and services that you might then be providing, because it's very effective to just say, here's a contract, our terms and conditions might be are on our website, which then allows consumers to take that rather than just sign it. They can go and look at the terms and conditions very quickly. Also, you can lose a document pretty easily. It's pretty hard to lose a web page. So that might be effective. And then also to tell the consumer that, look, if we have a members portal, you'll give us a boatload of information about you as a person, and this is how we're going to deal with it in line with our obligations under the Privacy Act. And so it depends upon what you're wanting your website to do. And if you're using it for one purpose, you might not need a lot of other material. I'd also recommend some caution about just finding a reputable company and just copying their privacy policy or copying their terms and conditions, because they might not fit your purpose.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Things have to be fit for purpose. And of course, if you're a broker, a good place to actually put your credit guide. It's a public document, and it's something that under the NCCP has to be if not one of the first documents a borrower gets before really engaging your services. So to me, that's always a great place for where your credit guide should be sitting. A question here is, how best protect oneself if a lender finds fraud on an application? My first response in my head goes, PI and don't commit fraud in the first place. Now, we're not suggesting that the broker has committed fraud. I jest with that. But so look, don't get me wrong, and a part of the extension to the best interest duty, the revamp of responsible lending obligations talks about obligation and responsibilities back to the borrower, right? if it gets through. So to me, there is always accountability to the borrower, because sometimes you just might not see it. You might not, it may not be transparent or evident in what you're doing that the borrower has committed fraud. The loan goes to the lender, and the lender says, wait a second, our due diligence shows X, Y, Z problem. How do you protect against that? Is it a PI issue?
I think it's always a good idea to tell your insurer first up, because a lot of policies will say, if you don't tell us within a reasonable time, then you might not be covered. So, you know, yes, there is a degree of, you know, admission to yourself that yes, there might be a problem, but it's better to have that issue with your insurer than there actually be a claim and you not have any coverage whatsoever. Turning to how to prevent or mitigate that issue, I think it's important to have a consistent and rigorous process for checking the information your clients give you, because the easiest way to say that you should have known something is, well, you didn't really check very much, did you? So I think it's very important that you have a rigorous and consistent process for how you verify particular types of information that your clients will give you. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that issue will never arise. There's always an old adage that I use for quality assurance processes, is that it doesn't guarantee that you do it right. It just means that you'll guarantee that you might do it wrong every time. So there is always a concern, but the best way to protect is say, look, I had a uniform process. It's very rigorous. It checks all of these things. I did that. I didn't detect it despite all of this. How is it now my problem? Because it's really something that the client then has gone to some considerable lengths to hide their fraud. Why should that be the broker's fault?
Yeah, and it's where that modifications or the Responsible Lending Repeals Act and so on is sort of taking a part in that journey, saying there's an accountability to the borrower that can't be ignored and is a part of the equation somewhere. So hopefully that's true. I don't necessarily agree with all that's in that bill, but anyway, we'll leave that for another day.
Tell me a piece of legislation that we all agree with.
There's a very good point. I haven't seen one yet.
Neither.
Oh, well. At least it keeps us all on the job somewhere, I guess. Mate, what about, when we're talking about bank accreditations before, is there a position, what if a bank cancels your accreditation purely on volume? We talk about separation letters and so on, where they may have something in the background, but they don't tell you what it is, and it's not black or white in what's going on. But what if they cancel your accreditation because you purely don't give them volume? Can they do that, or is it just another subject to the agreement sort of thing?
I think I hate using this. It will depend upon the size of the institution, because if they have all of, say it's a large bank who gets a large portion of the consumer credit market, and they have something that says you must give us this many, that might be consumed as what the lawyers would call a minimum order value. So you have to give them a minimum order. There has been some cases that have been run, not in this industry, but in other industries, about minimum order values, and that can be anti-competitive, but it depends upon how widespread that issue is. Otherwise, and putting that issue to one side, it really can be a creature of what the contract says, in which case you might be in some strife if the contract says you have to give us this, otherwise we have a right to terminate. I'm not sure how fair or not that is, but it's one of the things where if you are being cancelled and you are concerned about whether it's within the terms of the agreement, you probably should be seeking some advice.
Yeah, okay, very good. What about one of the hot issues in the market at the moment is the discrimination, for the sake of another term, or the imbalance or the injustices between timeframes through bank branches versus their broker departments. So we're talking same bank, branches versus broker departments. I can do it in 3 days through a branch, but it could take me 4 weeks through the broker division. Is that got a, I know everything's subject to, but it's a real hot subject in the industry. Something that I've pushed hard against, because I don't see that there should be any reason for it. In today's technologies and so on, and the promises that were made in the peak of COVID last year, that these things would be resolved by bringing processing back on shore, improving technologies. I don't know if they were just blowing hot air up my backside. Nothing seemed to happen. And then it still goes on. You say, well, yeah, this is inappropriate. To me, there's competition issues. They're favouring one arm of distribution over another. It's all the same institution. There is, from a processing point of view, outside of discretionary authorities, which are very limited these days. But in the old days, when I was in the banking system, I had discretionary authority, so I could approve my loans as such. Very limited in today's world. It's not the same as what it used to be. But all these things sit back and say, yeah, this is not right. This is an injustice. Is it?
I can understand a very small delay between the channels, because if you're giving your information to a bank's broker using the retail part of the channel, that information is being input directly into the bank, whereas there is an extra step if you're going to the proprietary channel. I'm not working in that. I'm not sure what the technological difference is between the two. I don't think it would relate or show a difference of, say, 3 days versus 30 days. I don't see 27 days worth of difference between that based on that issue. Putting that to another side, unless there is something specifically that says that these are going to be the turnaround times, it does seem to be a creature of the agreements that we have with the lenders, where, yes, it's not ideal. Yes, we don't know why they're doing it. It could be for some nefarious purpose. It could be for a legitimate purpose. We don't know. But unless we have something that we can say, you told me that you would do this, it's going to be very hard for us to prosecute. And so I think there's probably some scope for us to try and come together as an industry and say this should be the uniform rule book.
Yeah. And we have reached out to industry in our members to say, give us some examples that fit into this box, which is the box that you determined for me. Thanks for that. And it's hard to get to exactly fit in the box, to be able to have something that you legally challenge. And I don't know if it's deliberate smoke and mirrors tricks, but it is a bit of a challenge. But we are not letting that one go. But in saying that, lenders' timeframes are improving, and I think that's largely by publicising the issue and talking about it in industry media and in platforms and so on, and the aggregators giving it a nudge, as well as ourselves being prepared to take it up in the media and challenge it. So interesting. And coming back onto your comments about that minimum order style of parallel, if you like, within volume. I've got a comment here with somebody that says that would minimum order not be in the best interest of the client? And I think when we talk about best interest duty points at the conduct of the broker, doesn't point at the conduct of the lender. So I would agree it's not in the best interest of the client, and I am actually debating that with senior federal ministers of our country and the opposition in regards to that. But I don't really see it as it's not a direct connection to the best interest duty. It's a consequence that impacts back to the broker. So you can't sort of point that at the lender and saying, you're not acting the best as the client. Banks go, well, I don't give a shit because I don't act in the best interest of a client. That's your problem. That's your legislation. I conduct myself against the ABA's code of conduct or ASIC law or whatever it may be that they fall under, Corporations Act, whatever. Would that be right?
I think that's right. I think that concept will create a degree of conflict within the broker between their organisation's obligation to try and meet that minimum order value if it is enshrined in a contract, versus their duty to each individual client to get them the most appropriate deal for their circumstances, and they might not necessarily be the same thing. Yeah.
It's all very challenging. This legal field of yours, mate. I'm surprised your hair isn't grey and you're bald. That's
there's the old adage: if you ask 10 lawyers, you'll get 11 opinions. So
fair call. All right. So one that is an interesting question I've got here, looking around the confidentiality and privacy requirements and obligations when you're storing information. you have then there's an example here is a client using Microsoft One. Now, I don't know what Microsoft One is. I'm an Apple person, so everything I've got is Apple related somewhere, or Google as far as storage is. We sort of know that, and you've given us guidance on our obligations and disclosures and the Privacy Act consents and so on, or privacy of information being held. Do you have any sort of general framework what that law looks like when you come to, say, storing documentation, clients' information? Is there a rule that says it's got to look like this somehow?
There are provisions within the Australian privacy principles, which are set out in the Privacy Act, about what you need to tell your client about how you're storing information, and in circumstances where it's going to another organisation, how you're disclosing that information, because storing it with Microsoft is in essence disclosing it to Microsoft. And so your privacy policy should say, when we collect information from you, it will be stored on Microsoft One servers. And importantly, where geographically are those servers located? And that can be a difficult question to identify, because there might be countries where we're quite comfortable with the information going to. Canada, for instance, is similar to us. New Zealand, similar to us. But there might be countries that we're less comfortable with sending our information. And more importantly, the clients might be less comfortable sending that information. So it's important that they know in the privacy policy where that information might be stored, and then that you'll also be disclosing it to those entities for the purpose of storage.
So is it then the case that, because I had a slightly different view on this, so this is very good for my own knowledge, is that subject to what country, it is okay to store data outside of Australia?
It depends on the type of information. There's different obligations. Right. Just because you're storing it overseas is not necessarily a problem if the client knows and if the client consents. If the client doesn't know about it, it's very hard for them to consent, and that's why it's important you call out, particularly in a document like the privacy policy. We use, a particular company to store information. They have servers located in and as many countries as you can identify. I've done this for a large company, and they had servers in a number of different countries, some of which we're okay with, some of which are a little bit less okay. But it's important that the clients know, because they need to have that information before they can consent to that. And we really should be getting that consent as soon as possible, before or after we've got the information.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad this isn't my gig. I get tired. And I'm sorry, this is a little bit out of sequence because we've had quite a few messages coming through. So I just wanted to backtrack a little bit back to websites. Are there any particular things from when you promote offers on a website that you should take particular attention to? And I guess there's advertising parameters from ASIC about how you advertise things, but are there anything that is particularly carefully you need to watch? I guess like disclosing interest rates and fees, or certain offers, or cash offers, or holidays is quite a popular one. You can win a trip sort of thing. Are there any sort of rules you got to watch when you're doing that?
You should be telling how you're going to determine that price. Yes, it'll be one out of the number of registrants for that particular offer. How to validly apply for that offer. When they might be disqualified. What are the when that will be awarded? When, to say it's a holiday, when that holiday might have to occur. Because when you're offering something, you've got to make sure that it's not misleading, and you've got to make sure it's not deceptive, because then you can run into some particular issues under the Competition and Consumer Act.
Right. Okay. There you go. But it makes putting promotional sort of offers on your website something you've got to be really careful about.
Particularly if they're just you can win a holiday, because it's very vague as to how that's going to operate.
And there's different laws in different states as to whether or not it might fall under a lottery style of legislation. Is that right, or regulation?
Specifically, I'm not sure of the differences between the states. The Competition Consumer Act is a federal piece of legislation, so it applies to all the states, which is why I referred to that first. So it doesn't matter where your listeners are located, they should be keeping that in mind.
Yep.
There might also be particular state-based legislation. Say New South Wales is a good example, which have I think it's the Fair Trading Act in New South Wales, which has some additional material as well, which might differ from Queensland, where I'm based. So there are some differences between the states, but I can't really draw out a particular difference between the two. We just need to keep that in mind.
You must feel like you're sitting in the courthouse at the moment, mate. You're getting questions coming at you from all different angles and then repeating the same question to see if you give a different answer.
You're much nicer than judges I've appeared before. They can sometimes be very vigorous in their questioning, and rightfully so.
What you're saying is I need to lift my game.
Not necessarily.
Very considerate reply. And I'm going to do it to you again. So I'm going to go back to slightly a little bit when we were talking about storage of documentation, but changing that thought process into support staff, administration staff who may be based overseas, whether it be in the Philippines or there's quite a few countries, I think, that we're doing it, and whether they're still doing it now or not, debatable. I think some are, some aren't. I don't know how COVID's really into play with all that, but are there certain things legally that need to be considered with that? Because you are sharing data, again, with an overseas country.
And that's right. Wherever there's work being done on the information, whether let's say it is in the Philippines, that will necessitate a disclosure to the Philippines. So your clients should be aware that is something where we'll do work. There's also particular provisions, and it's probably outside our particular industry, but in Europe, they've got a particular term for use of data called processing, which is a broader definition than what we might have in Australia, and they've got particular obligations about how you'll process information.
Yeah, because it is still relatively common. I know Nepal's another country where stuff happens, and I know some of the places that do that have actually made those people in those countries do our courses, so like Cert 4 and so on, so that they can tick the boxes of knowledge, if you like, as to how industry works. But I guess it's beyond that. It's really about the movement of personal information and data that becomes so. Yeah, very good. Well, mate, we're almost at the end of our tether here, end of what we were going to talk about. I have another question around the bank's turnarounds and the banking code of practice. I think we've sort of touched on that, and I guess the banks are accountable to the ABA in regards to whether they are complying or not to that. But the thing that gets under my claw with turnaround times is always the piece whereby you have an innocent borrower out there who doesn't really give a rat's. You know, they don't care whether you're going to the broker department or the branch department, only in as far as the processing the loan goes. They just want the loan processed and done, and dealing with you as a broker because they have a relationship with you, and they shouldn't be penalised in any shape or form, in my mind, because of that. And these turnaround times certainly put a spanner in those in those works and those issues. So it's always I think that one is only going to play out once banks get their act together, to be honest with you, and they're heading that direction, and we'll see how well they continue to play down that path. Mate, let me wrap up on this, and again, a question without notice for you. If there was one piece of I'm going to reluctantly use the word advice, but I'm not after advice. One piece of guidance you would give a broker in regards to how they approach anything legally, what would that be, do you think? Is there something that comes to mind to say, if you've got a matter that's going down a legal journey, I would suggest you consider something? Have a thought?
I think the best guidance is to have a process. I think a lot of, particularly for brokers, if you have an inconsistent process, you're inviting trouble. And so I think having a process that you follow each time it might not be the best process, but you don't want to show inconsistency because that could alert other people to where there might be problems. So having a consistent process is probably the best, recommendation I can give, and making sure that process is documented, educated, and known to your organisation.
That is a great recommendation. I love that. So yeah, consistency is a good thing, they say. Have your process in place and stick to it in all cases.
I usually quote the Mythbusters rule that the only difference between science and screwing around is writing it down. So.
Very good. Matt, thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning. I know how busy you are. I really, really appreciate you joining us, and I'm sure everyone listening in has thoroughly enjoyed your conversation and what you've had to say, and your guidance and suggestions and recommendations, especially that last one. It's an absolute ripper. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. And just as a little tip, I sent you an email earlier. I'll look forward to your reply.
Thanks so much, Peter, and a pleasure to speak with everyone. If you have any other information you want to reach out, Matthew Rodgers at rbglawyers.com.au. Happy to talk to you. See you later.
Thanks, Matt. Take care, mate. Speak to you soon. All right, please. Excellent. Thanks, Matt, for that. Stay tuned for when we next get together in a month's time. We're going to be talking to people to Joanna and Nick, as you can see on the screen now, about how we can help you as a business person. So this isn't about credit or anything like that. This is about you in business, and these people are highly skilled professionals in navigating that business world. And I think there's some really valuable content we'll be able to get from Joanna and Nick in regards to you and your business and how you can make that an efficient practice and a compliant practice. So look forward to you joining us there on the 19th of August and being a part of that conversation. And also, while I'm on it, don't forget, we've changed the date of our conference. This is a COVID impact. As much as we don't want to, we got it. So 5th of November, Friday, back to the old time of the year, but everything else is still happening. So we're still, we've got our day conference there that it's got content coming from all around the world, actually. And then at night time, it's all about heroes and villains. So get ready to dress up and bring out that inner hero or villain to have a bit of fun at night time. I'm sure come November, we'll all be busting for a big party, and we're up for it, so it's on. So look forward to seeing you there. Make sure you register now, though. Get it done and dusted, and you don't have to think about it. It's all COVID safe. We've got, everything's in place, so you're fine. You're not going to lose any money. It's all going to work out well. So come along, register now, hook in. And again, thanks to our sponsors as we finish up. Appreciate all their support and help. And don't forget, after this, you will get a little email, and it will give you your code for your CPD hours, and also an opportunity to give us a bit of feedback. That way we can continue to improve what we're doing. So thank you once again for joining us. Take care, be safe, do as the state governments tell you with the COVID rules at the moment, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.